The Western Philosophy Chapter11 American Philosophers Santayana, James and Dewey. Introduction. There are, as everybody knows, two Americas, of which one is European. European America is chiefly the eastern states, where the older stocks look up respectfully to foreign aristocracy, and the more recent immigrants look back with a certain nostalgia to the culture and the traditions of their native lands. In this European America, there is an active conflict between the Anglo-Saxon sober, and the genteel, and the restless and the innovating spirit of the newer peoples. The English code of thought and manners must eventually succumb to the continental cultures that encompass and inundate it there. But for the present, that British mood dominates the literature, though no longer the morals, of the American East. Our standard of art and taste in the Atlantic states is English. Our literary heritage is English, and our philosophy, when we have time for any, is in the line of British thought. It is this New England that produced Washington and Irving and Emerson and even Poe. It is this New England that wrote the books of the first American philosopher, Jonathan Edwards, and it is this New England that captured and remade that strange, exotic figure. America's latest thinker, George Santayana. For Santayana, of course, is an American philosopher only by grace of geography. He is a European who, having been born in Spain, was transported to America in his unknown childhood, and who now, in his ripe age, returns to Europe as to a paradise, for which his years with us were a probation. Santayana is steeped in the genteel tradition of the old America. The other America is American. It consists of those people, whether Yankees or Hoosiers or cowboys, whose roots are in this soil, and not in Europe, whose manners, ideas, and ideals are a native formation, whose souls are touched neither with the gentility of the families that adorn Boston or New York or Philadelphia or Richmond, nor with the volatile passions of the Southern or Eastern European. Men and women molded into physical ruggedness and mental directness and simplicity by their primitive environment and tasks. This is the America that produced Lincoln and Thoreau and Whiteman and Mark Twain. It is America of horse sense, of practical men, of hard-headed businessmen. It is the America which so impressed itself upon William James that he became its exponent in philosophy, while his brother became more British than an Englishman, and it is the America that made John Dewey. We shall study Santayana first, despite chronology, because though he is the youngest of our greater philosophers, he represents an older and a foreign school, and the subtlety of his thought and the fragrance of his style are like the perfume that lingers, room from which the flowers have been taken away. We shall have very probably no more Santayana, for hereafter it is America and not Europe that will write America's philosophies. Paragraph 1. George Santayana. Period 1. Biographical. Santayana was born at Madrid in 1863. He was brought to America in 1872 and remained here till 1912. He took his degrees at Harvard and taught there from his 27th to his 50th year. One of his students describes him vividly. Those who remember him in the classroom will remember him as a spirit solemn, sweet, and withdrawn, whose Johnine face by a Renaissance painter held an abstract eye and hieratic smile, half mischief, half content, whose rich voice flowed evenly in cadences, smooth and balanced as a liturgy, whose periods had the intricate perfection of a poem and the import of a prophecy, who spoke somehow to his hearers and not to them. Stirring the depths in their natures and troubling their minds as an oracle might, to whom pertained mystery and reverence, so compact of remoteness and fascination was he, so moving and so unmoved. He was not quite content with the country of his choice. His soul, softened with much learning and sensitive as a poet's soul must be, for he was poet first and philosopher afterward, suffered from the noisy haste of American city life. Instinctively he shrank back to Boston, as if to be as near to Europe as he could, and from Boston to Cambridge and Harvard, and privacy that preferred Plato and Aristotle to James and Royce. He smiled with a little bitterness at the popularity of his colleagues and remained aloof from the crowd and the press. But he knew that he was fortunate to have found a home in the finest school of philosophy that any American university had ever known. It was a fresh morning in the life of reason, cloudy but brightening. His first essay in philosophy was The Sense of Beauty, 1896, which even the matter of fact Munsterberg rated as the best American contribution to aesthetics. 5 years. Matter of fact. 5 years later came a more fragmentary and more readable volume. Interpretations of poetry and religion. Then, for 7 years, like Jacob, serving for his love, he worked silently, publishing only occasional verse. He was preparing his magnum opus, The Life of Reason. These four volumes, Reason in Common Sense, Reason in Society, Reason in Religion, Reason in Art, and Reason in Science, at once lifted Santayana to a fame whose quality fully atoned for what it lacked in spread. Here was the soul of a Spanish grandee grafted upon the stock of the gentle Emerson, a refined mixture of Mediterranean aristocracy with New England individualism, and above all, a thoroughly emancipated soul, almost immune to the spirit of his age, speaking as if with the accent of some pagan scholar who from ancient Alexandria to view our little systems with a wondering and superior eye, and to dash our new old dreams with the calmest reasoning and the most perfect prose. Hardly since Plato had philosophy phrased itself so beautifully. Here were words full of a noble ten, phrases of delicate texture, perfumed with subtlety, and barbed with satiric wit. The poet spoke in these luxuriant metaphors. The artist in the chiseled paragraphs. It was good to find a man who could feel at once the lure of beauty and the core of truth. After this effort, Santayana rested on his fame, contending contenting himself with poems and minor volumes. Then, strange to say, after he had left Harvard and gone to live in England, and the world presumed that he looked upon his work as finished, he published in 1923 a substantial volume on skepticism and animal faith, with the blithe announcement that This was merely the introduction to a new system of philosophy to be called realms of being. It was exhilarating to see men of 60 sailing forth on distant voyages anew and producing a book as vigorous in thought and as polished in style as any that he had written. We must begin with this latest product because it is, in truth, the open door to all of Santayana's thinking. Paragraph 2. Skepticism and Animal Faith. Here, says the preface, is one more system of philosophy. If the reader is tempted to smile, I can assure him that I smiled with him. I am merely attempting to express for the reader the principles to which he appeals when he smiles. Santayana is modest enough, and this is strange in a philosopher, to believe that other systems, that his own, are possible. I do not ask anyone to think in my terms. If he prefers others, let him clean better if he can the windows of his soul, that the variety and beautiful of the prospect may spread more brightly before him. In this last and introductory volume, he proposes to clear away, first of all, the epistemological cobwebs that have enmeshed and arrested the growth of modern philosophy before he delineates the life of reason he is willing to discuss with all the technical paraphernalia dear to the professional epistemologist. The origin, validity, and the limits of human reason. He knows that the great snare of thought is the uncritical acceptance of traditional assumptions. Criticism surprises the soul in the arms of convention. He says, unconventionally, he is willing to doubt almost everything. The world comes to us dripping with the qualities of the senses through which it has flowed, and the past comes down to us through a memory treacherously colored with desire. Only one thing seems certain to him, and that is the experience of the moment. This color, this form, this taste, this odor, this quality, these are the real world, and their perception constitutes the discovery of essence. Idealism is correct, but of no great consequence. It is true that we know the world only through our ideas. But since the world has behaved for some thousands of years, substantially as if our combined sensations were true, we may accept this pragmatic sanction without worry for the future. Animal faith Maybe faith in a myth, but the myth is a good myth. Since life is better than any syllogism, the fallacy of Hume lay in supposing that by discovering the origin of ideas, he had destroyed their validity. A natural child meant for him an illegitimate one. His philosophy had not yet reached the wisdom of the French lady who asked if all children were not natural. This effort to be skeptically strict in doubting the veracity of experience has been carried by the Germans to the point of a disease, like a madman forever washing his hands to clean away dirt that is not there. But even these philosophers who look for the foundations of the universe in their own minds do not live as if they really believed that things cease to exist when not perceived. We are not asked to abolish our conception of the natural world, nor even in our daily life to cease to believe in it. We are to be idealists only northwest, or transcendentally. When the wind is southerly, we are to remain realists. I should be ashamed to countenance opinions which, when not arguing, I did not believe if it would seem to me dishonest and cowardly to militate under other colors than those under which I live. Therefore, no modern writer is altogether a philosopher in my eyes, except Spinoza. I have frankly taken nature by the hand, accepting as a rule, in my farthest speculation, the animal faith I live by from day to day. And so, Santayana is through with epistemology, and we breathe more easily as we pass on with him to what magnificent reconstruction of Plato and Aristotle, which he calls the life of reason. This epistemological introduction was apparently a necessary baptism for the new philosophy. It is a traditional concession. Philosophy still makes its bow in epistemological dress, like the labor leaders who for a time were, wear silk breeches at the king's court. Some day, when the Middle Ages are really over, philosophy will come down from these clouds and deal with the affairs of men. Paragraph 3. Reason in Science. The life of reason is a name for all practical thought and action, justified by its fruits in consciousness. Reason is not foe of the instincts. It is their successful unison. It is nature become conscious in us, illuminating its own path and goal. It is the happy marriage of two elements. thoughts, impulse, and ideation, which, if wholly divorced, would reduce man to a brute or a maniac. The rational animal is generated by the union of these two monsters. He is constituted by ideas which have ceased to be visionary and actions which have ceased to be vain. Reason is man's imitation of divinity. The life of reason bases itself frankly on science because science contains all truthworthy knowledge. Santayana knows the precariousness of reason and the fallibility of science. He accepts the modern analysis of scientific method as merely a shorthand description of regularities observed in our experience rather than laws governing the world and guaranteed unchangeable. But even so modified science must be our only reliance. Faith in the intellect is the only faith yet sanctioned by its fruits. So Santayana is resolved to understand life, feeling like Socrates that life without discourse is unworthy of a man. He will subject all the phases of human progress, or the pageant of man's interests and history, to the scrutiny of reason. He is modest enough, nevertheless. He proposes no new philosophy, but only an application of old philosophies to our present life. He thinks the first philosophers were the best, and of them all he ranks highest Democritus and Aristotle. He likes the plain, blunt materialism of the first, and the unruffled sanity of the second. In Aristotle, the conception of human nature is perfectly sound. Everything ideal has a natural basis, and everything natural an ideal development. His ethics, when thoroughly digested and weighed, will seem perfectly final. The life of reason finds there its classic explication, and so, armed with the atoms of Democritus and the golden mean of Aristotle, Santayana faces the problems of contemporary life. In Santayana philosophy, I am a decided materialist, apparently the only one living, but I do not profess to know what matter is in itself. I wait for the men of science to tell me. But whatever matter may be, I call it matter boldly, as I call my acquaintances Smith and Jones, without knowing their secrets. He will not permit himself the luxury of pantheism, which is merely a subterfuge for atheism. We add nothing to nature by calling it God. That word, nature, is poetical enough. It suggests sufficiently the generative and the controlling function, the endless vitality and the changeful order of the world in which I live, to be forever clinging to the old beliefs in these refined and denatured forms, is to be like Don Quixote, tinkering with obsolete armor. Yet Santayana is poet enough to know that a world quite divested of deity is a cold and uncomfortable home. Why has man's conscience, in the end, invariably rebelled against naturalism and reverted in some form or other to cults of the unseen? Perhaps because the soul is akin to the eternal and ideal, it is not content with that which is, and yearns for a better life. It is saddened by the thought of death, and clings to the hope of some power that may make it permanent amid the surrounding flux. But Santayana concludes bluntly, I believe there is nothing immortal. No doubt the spirit and the energy of the world is what is acting in us, as the sea is what rises in every little wave, but it passes through us, and cry out as we may, it will move on. Our privilege is to have perceived it as it moved. Mechanism is probably a universal, and though physics cannot account for that minute motion and pullulation in the earth's crust, of which human affairs are a portion, the best method in psychology is to suppose that mechanism prevails even in the inmost recesses of the soul. Psychology graduates from literature into science only when it seeks the mechanical and the material basis of every mental event. Even the splendid work of Spinoza on the passions is merely literary psychology, a dialectic of deduction, since it does not seek for each impulse and emotion its physiological and mechanical ground. The behaviorists of today have found the right road and should follow it unfrightened. So thoroughly mechanical and material is life, that consciousness, which is not a thing but a condition and a process, has no causal efficacy. The efficacy lies in the heart with which impulse and desire move brain and body, not in the light which flashes up as thought. The value of thought is ideal, not causal. That is, it is not the instrument of action, but the theater of pictured experience and the recipient of moral and aesthetic delights. It is the mind that controls the bewildered body and points out the way to physical habits, uncertain of their affinities. Or is it not much rather an automatic inward machinery that executes the marvelous work, while the mind catches here and there some glimpse of the operation, now with delight and adhesion, now with impotent rebellion. Lalande, or whoever it was, who searched the heavens with his telescope and could find no God, would not have found the human mind if he had searched the brain with a microscope. Belief in such a spirit is simple belief in magic. The only facts observed by the psychologist are physical facts. The soul is only a fine, quick organization within the material animal, prodigious network of nerves and tissues, growing in each generation out of a seed. Must we accept this buoyant materialism? It is astounding that so subtle a thinker and so ethereal a poet as Santayana should tie to his neck the millstone of a philosophy which, after centuries of effort, is as helpless as ever to explain the growth of a flower or the laughter of a child. It may be true that the conception of the world as a bisectable hybrid, half material and half mental, is the clumsy conjunction of an automaton with a ghost, but it is logic and lucidity personified alongside of Santayana's conception of himself as an automaton, automatically reflecting on its own automatism. And if consciousness has no efficacy, why was it involved so slowly, so painfully, and why does it survive in a world in which useless things so soon succumb? Consciousness is an organ of judgment as well as a vehicle of delight. Its vital function is the rehearsal of response and the coordination of a reaction. It is because of it that we are men. Perhaps the flower and its seed and the child and its laughter contain more of the mystery of the universe than any machine that ever was on land or sea. And perhaps it is wiser to interpret nature in terms of life rather than try to understand her in terms of death. But Santayana has read Bergson too and turns away from him in scorn. Bergson talks a great deal about life. He feels that he has penetrated deeply into its nature, and yet death, together with birth, is the natural analysis of what life is. What is this creative purpose that must wait for sun and rain to set in motion? What is this life that in any individual can be suddenly extinguished by a bullet? What is this elan vital that a little fall in temperature would banish altogether from the universe? Paragraph 4. Reason in religion. Today's work is over.